Hello, and thanks for joining me. Today, we're going to talk about painting chassis rails. What I have here is the start of a new project, and it's a set of 149 Worx chassis rails. It's their homebrew chassis, and they're in raw steel. Take a look at those. And we're going to talk about painting chassis rails today, because yes, the raw steel look can be cool. I actually thought about leaving it like this and letting them slowly rust over time, but I decided instead to give them a splash of color. All of the things I'm going to go over here you can use on aftermarket chassis like this, or even your stock chassis. I'm going to be painting these a real pretty caterpillar yellow. I'm using the farm equipment paint from Rust-Oleum. Usually the farm paint is a little bit thicker than your normal paints. So what do? We just don't go and spray it on there and hope for the best, right? First thing we want to do is this, whether it's a raw chassis or painted chassis, is take you some sandpaper, and we're going to go and rough up the entire chassis. Take your sandpaper, and what I'm doing here is it's adding some grooves to the chassis, as you can tell. This isn't a thin, clear, see-through paint, so these grooves right here will give it something for the paint to bite to better. I'm going to go ahead and do that to both sides of the chassis rail, and then do the other one. I have completed sanding the chassis rails. Used some 180 sandpaper on them. Get them nice and scuffed up there. While you could just spray these on the ground or lay them on a box and paint them, I prefer to have them hanging kind of in the air to paint. So I'm going to make a jig to paint these on. And what I'm going to use to make that jig is a supersized drink cup from McDonald's. So actually I'm going to use two of these. I have one I've already made. Let me show you what the finished product's going to look like. This is one I made before to paint an aluminum transmission case. If you missed it, it's in the Ugly Duckling build thread. So here we go. I got two screw holes drilled in it, two screws sticking up through. And what we'll do is we'll take the chassis, line up one of the holes on it with the screw hole there, take the other one down, and put it through like so. Now the chassis is firmly in place, no shake, no wiggle there, and we can just go and spray paint it. The upside of doing it this way is it's not laying on a hard, flat surface, so you don't get no pooling around the edges. And I think in the end this allows you to do a better paint coat because you can hold it with one hand and move it around while you're spraying it. That way you can make sure you get up inside all these edges real well, and I think this gives you a cleaner finished product. So, go ahead and walk you through making this. It's pretty simple and straightforward, but I'll show you the steps that I went through to make this. First, I take my McDonald's cup and I'm just going to drill a hole in it. Next up, I'm going to take a body post reamer and just make this hole a little bigger. There we go. So we'll make sure that hole is big enough so that my screw will slide easily through it. Okay. Now I'm going to flip the cup over and put the screw up through the bottom. It's a little Phillips screw here I have that fits through the holes on the chassis. There we go. Next up, I'm going to take and put a washer on top of it. And then I'm going to take and screw a nut down on top of that. In the end, this will just help hold the screw in place. There we go. Now for the next step. We're going to take the chassis, we're going to slide it down over top of that, like so. Take our drill bit, put it through another hole in the chassis, and drill down through the cup. Now we're going to go and take a reamer again and ream that one out. Now that we're finished with that, we're going to take our screw, put it through just like before. There we go. Now just like before, we add a washer. And we go and put a nut on it. There we go. And now you kind of see one of the reasons I like using the McDonald's cups. You can't really tell it, but there's a little curve right here in the bottom. So by putting them in like that, it kind of makes them spread out. So that way you can slide something down over and the tension from the bottom will help hold it in place. Now on to the next step. Now for the next step, I'm going to take a paper towel and spray some alcohol on it. It's just standard rubbing alcohol. I'm going to take it and rub it across the chassis. This will remove any residue left behind from the cutting process, or even just handling it, or just being out and about in the air. And it'll also remove the sanding dust. We'll make sure you get all the edges. Now that we have both the rails wiped down, we're going to go and put them on the jigs. Like so. And see, that's what I'm talking about, that curve there. Spread these out so it holds the rail up nice and high. That way it's not touching the actual cup itself. Do the other one. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take these and let these finish drying. They still have just a little bit of moisture left on them from the alcohol. So we're going to let them flash off and then move on to applying paint. And now to paint these chassis rails. Make sure you shake your paint very well. It needs to be shook for a good 3-4 minutes at least. That way you can make sure it's nice and mixed well so it lays down evenly and you have no problems with runs or anything like that. So I'm going to step outside, put a thin coat on these. I'll come back and show you how they look. I'm spraying this outside because you should not spray this inside unless you have a fume hood, because the fumes can be very strong and overpowering. There we go. First coat of paint is on. It's kind of thin. I'll have to do probably 2 or 3 more coats. The final coat of yellow paint is on this side of the chassis. Now I'll flip it over and paint the other sides. And here we have the finished product. Chassis rails are painted a nice pretty caterpillar yellow now. This will go great with the blue Fisher's crawler part pieces that I'm adding to this chassis. I still have the chassis on their jigs because I'm going to let them set on here for another day or 2 before I start assembly, so the paint has time to fully cure. Speaking of paint curing, something you didn't see during this video is between each coat there was about an hour of wait time, and then before I flipped it over there was about 4 hours of wait time there. That way it gave the paint time to fully cure before I was handling it and between coats, and in the end that will help the paint hold up better. Also, where I scuffed it up will make the paint stick better to the metal so that hopefully it doesn't flake and scrape off as easy. I'll be honest, I'm not easy on my crawlers, so this chassis will see some abuse. That's why I went with this farm paint, because it is tough and it should hold up better. And if you have any questions or comments, make sure you drop them down below. Follow us on Instagram, that way you'll be able to see this build as it goes on and see pictures of it happening a lot quicker than you will on my YouTube channel. This will have its own build series on here as well, though, so you can stay tuned for that. Thank you for watching, and until next time, happy RCing!